Hi, welcome to IBM Tivoli Storage Manager 101. This presentation is going to cover why you need Tivoli Storage Manager, what are the basic functions of Tivoli Storage Manager, what components make up Tivoli Storage Manager, and what other products complement IBM Tivoli Storage Manager. So first and foremost, why do you need Tivoli Storage Manager? Well, as you know, a lot of important data resides on computers for both individuals and corporations. And this data can get lost because of hardware failures, because laptops get stolen, because files get corrupted, because a natural disaster might happen that wipes out an individual server or an IT center. Or you might have data that needs to be retained for a lengthy time for regulatory requirements. And simply you've got data out there that you've got to protect, so that if anything like a failure does occur, you can be able to get that data back rapidly and in a consistent format. And so that's where Tivoli Storage Manager plays. The most basic feature of Tivoli Storage Manager is backup. Backup is simply taking files that reside on your workstation, on your laptop, on your server, and making a copy of those, sending them over the network, and storing them on another machine, in this case, the Tivoli Storage Manager server. When we look at this setup here, we've got what's called a TSM client, and this is basically your workstation, your laptop, or your server with a small piece of TSM code installed on it. That is then going to do on either a scheduled basis or an on-demand basis a backup across the network to the Tivoli Storage Manager server. The Tivoli Storage Manager server keeps a specific number of versions of the files you're backing up. And so if you choose to keep 3 versions of your file, once the 4th version is backed up, TSM will automatically expire off the original first version, just so that we've only kept 3 in the TSM server. The number of versions you keep is completely based upon policy. You can have it set up the same for everybody in your organization or vastly different depending upon those individuals' needs. So maybe one user keeps 3 versions, another user keeps 30 versions. Now there are different types of backups. Our most basic backup is called a progressive incremental backup. This will only back up the new or changed files. So for instance, when a schedule kicks off, we go through, we figure out which files have changed or are new since the last backup, and we only ever back up those files. The progressive incremental backup is a very intelligent backup that's going to save you network bandwidth as well as server storage because we are just backing up the changed files. Unlike old paradigms of backups that other competitors use, for instance, the full plus incremental or full plus differential. The problem with the full plus incremental or full plus differential backups is once a week or once a month they require you back to re-backup everything in your environment. Even if those files haven't changed in 3 years, you've got to re-back them up. And so as you can imagine, that's very wasteful for network as well as storage space. I like to use the analogy between the progressive incremental backup and the full plus differential or full plus incremental backups of washing your clothes. When we go to wash the clothes, if you're using progressive incremental backup, you only wash the clothes that are dirty. Versus if you were to use the full plus incremental or full plus differential, once a week you'd have to go and wash all the clothes that resided everywhere in your drawers, in your closet, in your storage unit, even if those clothes hadn't been worn in many years, they would still have to be rewashed. So just thinking about the extra overhead that would be, that's very similar to what would happen if you have to do a full backup once a week or once a month. So TSM does not require this full backup for your normal file system data. We are intelligent enough to just back up the new or changed files. We also can do a volume level backup, and we have bare metal capabilities where we can back up your operating system files also. So if you lose your complete computer and want to restore not just the file system information, but also the operating system stuff, we can do a bare metal. So we'll talk about those in a little bit later in this presentation. So the benefits of Tivoli Storage Manager's backup is that we are able to rapidly back up the files that have changed or are new. And likewise, if you ask us to do a restore, we can restore just the correct files that you need. We can do automated offsite copy creations of the files once they are on the TSM server. So not only do we are able to keep a copy on the TSM server, but we can make an additional copy that you could take to Iron Mountain or send to another TSM server. Everything is policy based, and so you can customize those policies to meet your organization's needs. And backups are stored in tiered storage. And we'll talk about this in a little bit about how you can match the value of the data you're backing up to where it sits in the tiered storage and the type of storage it's going to reside on. And finally, we can offer a single point of control through the TSM server of all of these backup operations and storage pool and restore operations and everything else. Now, obviously, the opposite of backup is restore, but in my mind, restore is actually more critical because it doesn't do you any good to backup files if you can't restore them accurately. And with Tivoli Storage Manager, we're able to bring back exactly the files that you want. So if you do request a point-in-time restore, we will bring back only those specific files. Unlike our competitors, who a lot of times will bring back other files that were part of their full backup strategy, and they can't quite wrap their head around what needs to be restored. With TSM, we just bring back the files you need for that specific time point. We can also bring back files to a different server if you require it, or to a different location. We can either have the end user or the owner of that computer bring those files back, or the TSM administrator could assist in that restore. So the great thing about our Tivoli Storage Manager restores is it is reliable. It is bringing back only the files that are needed. It's very flexible in your restore options of where you're restoring those files to and at which point in time you're restoring from. And remember, because you can keep multiple versions of the file, you can choose exactly which version of that file you want restored or which date you want to restore your computer to look like. Another base feature of Tivoli Storage Manager is archive. Now, archive differs from backup in the fact that archive is keeping files for a specific amount of time. Remember, backup kept a specific number of versions of files. Archive keeps files for a specific amount of time. So you can choose the file and say, I want to keep this file for 7 years. And then after 7 years, I want you to expire it off the Tivoli Storage Manager server. Now with archive, it is also policy managed. You can choose to either have those original files once they've been archived from your TSM client, remember, which is your workstation or laptop or server, over to the TSM server. You can choose to either keep those archived files in place on the original machine or to delete them after they've been sent to the TSM server. But remember, archive is based upon the length of time, not upon the number of versions to keep. Now, a lot of our customers like to use this archive feature when it comes to having to keep specific tax files, specific regulatory requirement files out there for a specific amount of time, and adding a specific tag to those files so you can easily find them when you're going to do a retrieve. So for instance, when I archive a file, I may put January 2014 payroll and have that as part of the tag when it gets archived, so it makes it very simple to retrieve. Okay, so far we've looked at backing up file system files and we've looked at archiving files. Tivoli Storage Manager can also protect files that are residing on virtual machines. And we do virtual machine protection a little bit differently. We go through the vStorage server or the Hyper-V host server to protect all of the virtual machines behind those. We still utilize our progressive incremental backup strategy to back these up, but we are working more hand in hand with the vStorage server and the Hyper-V host server to do the restores and backups of these files. We are able, for instance, to automatically detect when new VMware virtual machines become available that need to be backed up. You do not have to install a TSM client on each of those virtual machines. You simply install it and work through the vStorage server itself. We also have points of interaction directly on the vStorage server. So if your VMware admins want to be doing backups and restores, they have those tools directly in their vCenter toolbox. Now, to back up virtual environments, the customer would purchase the optional TSM for virtual environment licensing, so TSM for VE licensing. So the nice thing about the TSM virtual machine protection is, once again, it's integrated directly into your TSM server and the storage pools behind that TSM server. There are multiple recovery options for what you want to recover and where you want to recover it to. It is centrally managed, and it's fast and efficient block level backups of those virtual machines. Another thing to consider when you're doing backups is how to protect databases and mail servers and other applications. These databases and applications are a little bit different from file system data in the fact that there's multiple files that are linked together and multiple files that have to be kept linked together during the backup process. So when it comes to databases and applications, there's a couple options. You could simply shut down the database and do an offline backup of all of those files. But a lot of these databases and applications that our customers are running are critical, and there's simply not a time frame to shut them down. So what we have is we have our TSM for databases, our TSM for mail, our TSM for enterprise resource planning. We have these additional products, licenses, that do an online backup of the individual database or application. We work hand in hand with the database vendor or the application vendor to make sure that we're backing up their product as they requested. So we utilize their interfaces and their calls and then send that data to the Tivoli Storage Manager server for protection. So this is basically giving you online protection of your critical applications and databases. There's no downtime. You don't have to take them offline. There are incremental backups built in based upon the database or application vendor's specifications. We do use the certified APIs that those vendors do provide. And everything is scheduled and automated, so you don't have to do anything manually. If you're looking at protecting databases, mail programs, or other applications, you would look at purchasing our TSM for databases, TSM for mail, TSM for ERP. Flashcopy Manager. Flashcopy Manager is another part of the Tivoli Storage Manager family. Yes, Flashcopy Manager can be used independent without Tivoli Storage Manager, but what I'm going to talk about is utilizing it together with Tivoli Storage Manager. What Flashcopy Manager does is it provides an online, near instantaneous snapshot of your volumes, of your databases, of your virtual machines. And the way that it does this is it utilizes the disk storage subsystems built-in capability to create snapshots. And so now, instead of having to deal with the database directly, what I'll do is I'll let my disk subsystem create a snapshot of that database or file system or virtual machine, and then I'll back up from that snapshot so that I don't have additional overhead on my production database, file system, virtual machine. Flashcopy Manager, what it does is it synchronizes this whole process of creating the snapshots, doing the backups from the snapshot, and then sending the information to the Tivoli Storage Manager server. Now, the nice thing about Flashcopy Manager is when you go to do the restores, you have multiple restore points that you can utilize. You could either restore from the local snapshot on the disk, if it still exists out there, or you can restore from your Tivoli Storage Manager copies. Now, we have 3 versions of Flashcopy Manager. We have Flashcopy Manager for Windows, Flashcopy Manager for Unix, and Flashcopy Manager for virtual environments. Okay, so we've talked about the basic ways that Tivoli Storage Manager protects data. We looked at the backups of your file systems using progressive incremental backups. We looked at archives. We looked at the ability to back up online databases. We looked at the ability to back up virtual environments. And we looked at the ability to utilize disk subsystems to create a flash copy of the active data and then back up from that secondary copy. Now what I want to talk about is the TSM architecture and why its superior setup really is going to give you, the customer, a lot of advantages when it comes to managing all of this data that's being backed up to the TSM server. So what we have here in our environment, the TSM client, this is the workstation, this is the laptop or the server that's being protected. And usually there's a piece of software, TSM client software, installed on that specific client, and then it will communicate either over the WAN, the LAN, or the SAN to the Tivoli Storage Manager server. Now the TSM server is usually a dedicated machine, and in conjunction with having the TSM server code installed there, we'll also have a DB2 database installed on that machine, and we'll have some storage attached to it. Now the importance of the DB2 database and the storage hierarchy. First, in the TSM's DB2 database, we are going to store the meta information about the data that we're protecting. So who sent that file? How many versions of that file do I keep? Where in the storage hierarchy am I storing that data? Is this file deduplicated? Is this file encrypted? All of this critical information is stored in the TSM DB2 database. And that DB2 database is part of the TSM license. You do not have to be a DB2 expert to utilize it. A lot of this complexity is hidden, and TSM gives you simple interfaces with that. Now the actual data that's being protected is sent to our storage hierarchy. So that copy of the file that you sent across the WAN, LAN, or SAN is now sitting somewhere in our storage hierarchy. And this storage hierarchy might be disk subsystems, it might be tape subsystems, it might be a VTL, it might be offsite tapes, it might be a tape library that's shared with other TSM servers. So the beauty of this storage hierarchy is that there's a lot of flexibility in Tivoli Storage Manager to move the data from one type of media to another. And a lot of our competitors cannot easily do this, but with TSM we have built in this concept, for instance, of rapidly backing up to disk, and then after X number of days, migrating that data out to tape. Or perhaps you've got an extremely large database that you want to back up directly to a SAN attached tape. That's also possible. Or perhaps you don't want to use tape at all, you only want to use disk subsystems. With TSM, we give you the flexibility to build the storage hierarchy to meet your needs. Oh, and guess what? 2 years down the road, when they introduce a new disk subsystem or a new tape subsystem, you can easily add that into your storage hierarchy, and Tivoli Storage Manager will automatically migrate the data from the older subsystem to the new subsystem. To review, the TSM server is made up of the actual TSM server code, and then the DB2 database, which stores the meta information about what's being backed up, who's backing it up, what are the schedules, who are the administrators. And it contains a storage hierarchy. This is where the actual data resides. This is can be a combination of disk, tape, VTL, whatever meets the customer's needs. Now, all of the backups and archives are managed by policies. And so the policies determine things like how many copies to keep, where to store it in the storage hierarchy, how long to keep it, what data to initially protect. Am I going to protect all data, or am I going to exclude certain JPEG files, or what do I want to keep and what do I not want to keep? So all of this is built upon policies. The policies are very flexible. You can change them as needed. You can have one policy for everybody or multiple policies out there for different individuals. So it really depends on your customer's needs. Now inside of the storage hierarchy that I spoke about, we have a lot of great functionality built in. The piece that I talked about originally was migration, where I can initially put data, for instance, to disk, and then I can migrate it out to tape, and then maybe I migrate it out to even a slower tape, or to a different type of media. The nice thing about this is that TSM does that seamlessly. Because of our DB2 database, we're easily able to track where the data is and where it needs to be moved to. We can also do things like reclaim dead space on tapes. So as those files expire off of tapes and you end up with a lot of dead space, TSM can take the valid data that remains on there and move it off to another tape, thus freeing up that half-empty tape to be reused. A lot of our competitors will have all these hundreds of tapes out there that only have a couple of files on them, but because they can't do this reclamation, they're stuck, and so the customer's wasting a lot of money on half-empty tapes. We have the concept of copy storage pools, where we'll create a copy of the original file, and maybe those files will be taken off-site to a DR site. We also have the ability to do things like have deduplicated storage pools, where we'll deduplicate the data as it arrives into that disk storage pool. The way that we have our storage pools set up, you can have parallel backups going to the different storage pools, as well as restores, multiple restores going on at the same time. And so the end result is, because we do manage our storage pools very effectively and efficiently, you're going to need less storage, fewer tape drives, and you're going to be able to do more with your technology because you're not going to have half-empty tapes sitting out there. And then as you introduce new storage technology into this hierarchy, you'll be able to free up the old ones and retire them. TSM is very effective and efficient with the way that it manages data. We have a lot of techniques built into our backup strategy to reduce the amount of data that needs to be sent across the network and the amount of data that needs to be stored on the TSM server. This includes things like client compression. It includes things like the incremental forever strategy, where we only back up new or changed files. It includes device compression, where we can take advantage of tape drive compression. And it includes our built-in client and server-side deduplication. So deduplication is built into TSM. It doesn't cost you anything extra. And we have the ability to either just dedupe on the server side, so as data arrives into a disk storage pool which is set up for dedupe on the TSM server, it is deduplicated and deduplicated with all the other client data that's being sent across. Or you can also have the data be deduplicated on the client before it is sent to the TSM server. And this is called our TSM client-side dedupe. Now, obviously, there are advantages for using one or both of them. With client-side dedupe, you are using less network traffic, but you do have a little bit more overhead on the client side before it sends it to the server. Okay, so deduplication is just a part of the types of data reduction techniques we employ. We also have compression, incremental forever, as well as device compression available. TSM's node replication is a way to have multiple TSM servers work together to protect each other's data. One of your TSM servers send copies of the data that's been backed up to it to another TSM server. So we'll have the source TSM server send copies of its data to the target TSM server. So now if your source TSM server goes down for any reason, maybe you have a natural disaster that wipes out that IT center, the clients will automatically be redirected to the target server to do their restores. So this is a great way to do a disaster recovery failover if one of your TSM servers is impacted because of hardware or other problems. This copying of files from the one server to the other server is on an incremental basis. Usually this node replication is kicked off after your daily backups are done. It can be done for all of the data or just a subset of the data, so you can choose what is replicated over to the other server. So node replication gives you a way to incrementally transfer copies of files to another TSM server where they will be managed as well and will act as a disaster recovery site in case your primary site goes down. We have other types of disaster recovery built in. The first piece we have is a planning piece. We call it our disaster recovery planning piece. And this helps you do things like track offsite volumes and tapes. So when you do send tapes offsite, you know where they're at exactly. That I know, for instance, oh, this tape is in transition right now in FedEx bill number XYZ, heading to this particular data recovery site. It will give you scripts on how to rebuild your TSM server if there is a failure. It will tell you what particular backups and so forth are needed to do those restores. And it'll basically give you information about what type of hardware is required for rebuilding your TSM server and any other components. So that's our disaster recovery planning tool. It's built into the TSM server, no extra charge. We also have bare machine recovery capability. What this would do is it would restore your TSM clients' operating systems and their file system data. When you go to back up the operating systems, obviously there's a lot more entailed than just backing up flat files. There's a lot of registries and everything else. And so the way that this is done, we have a couple components. We have a built-in ASR capability for the Windows machines where we can do a basic bare metal recovery. We also have our Tivoli Storage Manager for system backup and recovery, which does bare metal restore for AIX machines. And then we have Christie Bare Machine Recovery and TBMR. They're two products which will work on Windows, Linux, Solaris, and AIX machines. So the nice thing about all three of these solutions is that the bare machine recovery is part of its normal daily backup, just like your file system backup. So it is integrated directly with your Tivoli Storage Manager server and your nightly backups. Okay, Tivoli Storage Manager interfaces. There are many different ways to interface with the Tivoli Storage Manager server and clients. With the Tivoli Storage Manager server, we have our operations center, which I'll show you here in a minute. We've got command lines. We have the ability to do SQL commands. We have the ability to write scripts to interact with the TSM servers. For the clients, likewise, we have web access or GUI access to be able to do restores. You can do command lines off of those. We do have APIs that many third-party products will utilize to do backups to our TSM server. And because we are using the DB2 database, you can issue commands directly against that database to extract information about the TSM server backups and so forth. Our Tivoli Storage Manager Operations Center is the most effective and easy way to manage your Tivoli Storage Manager server. This gives you a great graphical overview of what's happening on your Tivoli Storage Manager server. It allows you to drill down and do different functions with your clients and your TSM servers, as well as to manage your databases, your logs, your storage pools, and to do things like kick off migration on demand or kick off a TSM client schedule that might have failed. So the Tivoli Storage Manager Operations Center is a very easy to use graphical interface. This is just an example of being able to go out and schedule the TSM backups as well as your TSM daily operations like database backups and so forth. And so this gives you a good idea of how simple it is to create a daily backup for the Workstations clients or virtual machines you have in your environment. We do have flexible scheduling. We have consistent return codes throughout the server and client. So if you do have a problem, it's very easy to figure out what's going on because we do have this consistent set of return codes and error messages. And everything is logged in our activity log and error logs, which can be consolidated and viewed from the Operations Center. Now, another product we have in the Tivoli Storage Manager family is for space management. And what space management does, also known as HSM, is it takes seldom used or very large files and it migrates those files from the place they reside to the Tivoli Storage Manager server, and it replaces them with a stub file. So if you were to go out and you were to look at a space managed drive, you would think all of your files are there. But in reality, what's happened is a lot of those files have been moved to the TSM server, and in their place is a little stub file. Now, when a user goes to access those migrated files, the TSM daemon sees that an access IO request is being issued against that stub, and it automatically pulls the file back from the TSM server across the network and puts it back into its original location. So for instance, you might get large hospitals with lots of x-rays, or large media companies with all kinds of clips that they want to be able to access rapidly online, but they don't want to be keeping them on expensive disk storage. So they'll migrate them off to less expensive storage being managed by Tivoli Storage Manager server. So the benefits of this is we move the data to less expensive storage, we automatically manage it and bring those files back when they're needed. And if there is a disaster on that client, when we go to restore those files, we don't have to restore all the original files. We can just bring back the stub files, which make it a lot more rapid for the restores. Migration and backup do work together. Another product we have in our TSM family is Fastback for Workstations. Fastback for Workstations is usually installed on either laptops or desktops, and it backs up the files the instant they're saved to the local disk. A copy is automatically made to the local disk, and then on a scheduled basis, another copy will be sent to either a TSM server or another location like a USB attached device or a remote file system. The nice thing about Fastback for Workstations is that it is an inexpensive solution that does an instantaneous backup for files of devices that are even in transit and that might not have a network. So for instance, if you're on an airplane that doesn't have network connectivity, your files are still being saved and protected as you do work on that airplane. So Fastback for Workstations can work either standalone or it can be integrated with Tivoli Storage Manager server. This is an entire list of the family of products that are with Tivoli Storage Manager. You'll see many of them that we talked about today. So the great thing about Tivoli Storage Manager is that it does have a very flexible architecture where you start with a Tivoli Storage Manager server that has its database for the meta information and the storage pool for the actual files. We get multiple clients backing up to it over the WAN, the LAN, or the SAN. If we want to, we connect it in with another Tivoli Storage Manager server to get the benefits of things like node replication for disaster recovery. We can protect all kinds of different data, whether it be file system, virtual machines, whether it's databases, or whether it's third-party products that are linking in via our API. Everything is automated, everything is meticulously logged, and there's a great understanding in the Tivoli Storage Manager community of how the product works. It's been around for over 20 years. So Tivoli Storage Manager is a very powerful tool that can do a lot of things by utilizing the Tivoli Storage Manager server architecture with our metadata stores on DB2 and our storage hierarchy. Do take some time to see some of the other videos we have out there that get into more information about some of the topics we touched on today, whether it's the TSM for Mail, Flashcopy Manager, TSM for VE. We do have additional information out there so you can learn more about how Tivoli Storage Manager protects your data.